This is the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project. It's a series of video interviews with the people who have made Nebraska broadcasting, radio, and television what it is today. We are at the studios of UNO Television in Omaha. I'm Neil Nelkin for the Nebraska Broadcasters Association. There are a few people more important to a broadcast operation than the technical folks who make it all possible, keeping transmitters on the air, making sure the signal is of a high quality nature, maintaining the audio quality, the video quality in television. These guys are behind the scenes and don't necessarily always get the recognition they deserve. Tonight, we're going to remedy that a little bit because we're talking tonight with one of the legendary broadcast engineers here in the Omaha market, a guy that's been around a long time, seen it all, done it all, and worked with pretty much everybody that has developed radio and television in this market over the years. We're talking about the chief engineer at KIOS, which is the radio station of the Omaha Public School District, and that would be Dick Dennis. Dick, thanks for your time. Welcome.
You're entirely welcome.
Well, let's talk about your history. How did Dick Dennis begin? How long ago was it that you decided this might be something that'd be interesting to you?
Well, I started out in ham radio, built all my own equipment, then went to work for KDMI in Des Moines.
KDMI.
Right, as a meter reader, because back then it was before remote controls. You had to have a first phone at the transmitter site at all times and take the meter readings every half hour.
Now, was the station at the transmitter site at that time?
No.
So you were out there lonely?
Right.
At the transmitter?
Mm-hmm. It was peaceful.
Taking meter readings every 30 minutes.
Right.
Back in those days.
Right.
How long did that last?
I was there for about 6 months.
And then got tired of it and decided to come into town.
And I graduated.
That'll do it. And then where'd you go? What was after KDMI?
KDMI, I went to Iowa State University. Then I went into the seminary for a year down in Conception, Missouri. And then I came back to Des Moines, went to work for Boys Town.
Boys Town?
Yeah.
In Des Moines?
No, in Omaha, yeah.
So you worked...
1964.
64
yeah.
In Boys Town.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do at Boys Town?
I was a counselor.
And what was your background for that?
None.
How long there?
I was there for about 10 years.
So you influenced a lot of children, a lot of boys that were growing up at Boys Town at the time. Do you still keep in touch with some of them?
Oh, yes.
Goes back a few years.
Yep.
And what any stars that came out of your counseling?
Nope.
Not particularly?
Not particularly.
After Boys Town, you got back into radio.
Right. And that was at KOWH.
KOWH, the infamous 660 AM.
Right, and 94.1 FM.
94.1 FM, which is, of course, evolved over the years, a different station today. But 660 AM KOWH, a lot of people don't realize that the call letters there actually stood for the Omaha World Herald.
Right.
That owned the radio station at one point.
Well, before Reconciliation Incorporated bought it, it was KOZN. And they changed the call letters to KOWH AM and FM.
KOZN, which was a country music format, AM and FM, right?
Right.
Country cousin.
Yeah, country cousin.
Today, KOZN is an all-sports radio station. Now, Country Cousin, who was that owned by?
Let's see. Well, that was owned by, when we bought it as Reconciliation, it was owned by Star Broadcasting, Peter Starr. And they managed the station. And then it was owned by the National Review.
The National Review, which is
Buckley.
a national publication owned by
Buckley.
William F. Buckley.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, this is not the same Buckley Broadcasting that owned WOR in New York. This was William F. Buckley, the conservative commentator.
That's correct.
And he owned radio stations in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yep.
Most people didn't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
We'll go back to KOWH, 660 AM, 94.1 FM. What was that like here in Omaha at that time? FM was really relatively new, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. 660 was the big money maker. You could hear it in Des Moines.
And it was what was then known as a clear channel frequency.
Right.
So.
And it was rock and roll.
It was daytime only?
Yes.
But it played rock and roll back in the Stores days. People also don't recognize that 660 AM KOWH was the Storrs station, owned by Todd Storrs, that launched the top 40 radio format.
Right.
First place in the country.
Right here.
Right here in Omaha. So you were there, and what was it like? What were you doing there? Engineering mostly?
Right, engineering mostly. It was a fun place to work. The format was urban contemporary. A bunch of crazy people. It was a blast.
And the FM was 24 hours?
Right, FM was 24 hours.
So that kept things moving pretty well. Where
Yes.
was it located? Where were the studios?
The studios, when I first started, they were in the Prom Townhouse
Which was?
on Dodge Street. Got blown away by the tornado.
Oh. And the radio station survived that?
No.
No.
Well, by that time we'd moved to 3910 Harney.
39th and Harney.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, whatever happened there to you? How long were you there at KOWH?
Oh, gee, I was there until I went to work for KLNG. I was probably there for about 5 years.
Now, KLNG, interesting people there as well. That was part of a national group of stations.
Right.
Welcome Radio.
Welcome Radio.
Who was your general manager there?
Scott,
Frank Scott?
Frank Scott, yeah, thank you.
Now, Frank Scott, of course, left Omaha and then came back and left and came back,
Right.
but originally from Virginia. He was actually Ronald Reagan, head of the Voice of America.
Yes, he was.
He worked for President Reagan in Washington.
Yeah.
So Welcome Radio ran KLNG as a talk radio station. That had to have been pretty early on in talk radio.
It was. We had people that would actually pull their cars over and look for a payphone so they could call in for the cell phone days.
Do you remember any of the on-air personalities at KLNG at the time?
Oh, let's see. There was Jeff Hammond, the guy from the World Herald who went to jail. Peter Citron.
Peter Citron?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And,
The late Peter Citron.
yeah, the late Peter
But
Citron.
Jeff Hammond's still around.
Yeah.
And still busy in the community. Been in and out of radio for years.
Yeah.
One way or another. So KLNG, which was again, was that a daytime station?
Yes.
So you seem to have built your career on daytime only AM radio stations. One of the things that we're losing today in engineers, and you go back to the days when there were lots and lots of AM directional radio stations, multiple towers
Correct.
that had to be very carefully managed. It's a little different today, isn't it?
Well, no, they still have to be very carefully managed. And I've got the equipment and the knowledge to do it, so I'm employed quite a bit on directionals.
Directional AM's kind of a dying breed. We talked before the program, since you have so much of a background in AM radio, and now that everything is becoming much more digital and AM is subject to a lot more interference than it ever has been.
Right.
What do you as an engineer see as the future for AM radio?
I don't think AM has much of a future. It might have a future in digital because that gets rid of a lot of the noise. But a lot of the tower sites don't have the bandwidth to pass the digital signal without a lot of money being spent to make them compatible with digital.
And in many instances, the stations just simply aren't worth that kind of investment.
Right. The land is worth more than the station.
We've seen that in a number of markets where tower sites have been sold, relocated, and the land sold for much more than the radio stations are sold for.
Right.
With regard to the directional AMs, are there people coming up that understand directional AMs in the industry? What happens when the last of the directional AM engineers are gone?
They're going to be out of luck.
Not much they can do.
Yeah, there's nobody coming up with that kind of knowledge anymore, nor do they want to learn it just because there's no money in it.
Well, now you had a pretty successful career. How did you learn? Where did you get your education?
Iowa State University.
In an electrical engineering course?
Chemical engineering, actually.
Chemical
Yeah.
engineering. Okay, a little different. One of the places you spent some time, legendary location here in Omaha, again, mainly forgotten, but talk to me about McMartin Industries.
Well, McMartin Industries, when I went to work for them, was a gung-ho company. They built radio transmitters, they built receivers for Muzak amplifiers, Consoles, control boards, audio control boards. They had they built satellite receivers and transponders.
Well, this was back, I believe, in the 1960s into the 1970s, right?
Yeah, mostly in the 1970s.
And you knew Ray McMartin.
Yes, I did.
What kind of a guy was he?
He was okay.
And
I didn't have any trouble with Ray.
And it was a family operation, right? It's family
Right.
owned. There was a guy there that designed a lot of the McMartin equipment that you worked with and for, just recently passed, and Charlie Goodrich.
Charlie Goodrich, big loss, huge loss. I never understood why he was never in the Hall of Fame.
Well, we may be able to fix that. Tell me about what eventually happened with McMartin Industries. You and Charlie Goodrich ended up kind of taking it over. Why did it go the way it did?
The company could not afford Ray McMartin.
The founder.
Yeah.
He was a bit extravagant.
Yes, very extravagant.
And when the economy didn't follow along, it became difficult to maintain the business.
Right. He couldn't buy parts.
So you and Charlie Goodrich came in and kind of saved all the people that had purchased McMartin equipment.
Right. We split the parts list in half. He took half and I took half. But we had the number, the 331-2000 number for McMartin Industries. And people would call in, and McMartin didn't have the parts, so if it was a part that I carried, I'd take care of it. If it was a part that Charlie took care of, I'd turn them over to Charlie.
Now, McMartin built a lot of high-power FM transmitters, which was a pretty big deal back in the day, and a lot of those are still on the air today, decades later.
Right. In fact, our transmitter, KIOS, is running 23 kilowatts. We purchased that, I believe, in 1976.
What was it that made the McMartin equipment so long-lasting?
It was built well. It was built simple. It was easy to work on. It was rugged. It was just a good transmitter.
And this was major equipment that was completely designed and fabricated here in Omaha, kind of put Omaha on the map.
Right, it did. Charlie was a design engineer for the transmitters, AM and FM both. We had AM transmitters all the way to 50 kilowatt. We had FM transmitters that were combined 25s that would give you 50 kilowatt.
And a number of them are still in service today around the country.
Right.
And I know you guys used to get calls regularly for parts and for service.
Right.
You used to go on service trips around the country to take care of McMartin customers.
Yes, I did. I saw most of the country courtesy of McMartin Industries.
Would you run into any particular problems, anything unique you can tell us, maybe about squirrels or mice in transmitters creating problems?
Well, one station in McKenzie, Tennessee had 3-inch transmission line, but it was 72 ohms because it was an old television line. And they married that up with a regular 50 ohm line, and it just didn't work.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
How'd you rectify that? And I use the word rectify advisedly.
Well, we told the owner that he would have to put in new line.
And a lot of expense there.
Yeah, because it was under a parking lot. He had to dig up the parking lot. So we put in Helix. And talk about critters. Well, at KQ, John was out of town, the chief over there, and
98.5.
yeah, the transmitter went off the air. The remote control called me, so I went out to the site, and the fuse on the pole was down. So I called OPPD. OPPD came out, put the fuse back in, and it immediately blew. So we opened up the transformer cabinet where the AC comes in from OPPD, and there's a huge black snake in there coiled around the whole thing.
Dead.
Dead, yeah.
Still smoking, probably.
Yeah.
So stories like that, engineers have dozens of stories of finding critters in the electrical equipment, particularly when the transmitters are out in the field somewhere.
Right, mice are bad.
Yeah, they don't respect your equipment at all.
No, they munch on wire and cause all sorts of problems.
So after McMartin failed and you were looking for things to do, where to go, where'd you end up after McMartin Industries?
After McMartin, let's see, where did I end up? I ended up doing contract work. And then I went to work for KIOS.
The Omaha Public School
Omaha
Station.
Public School Station.
Now, in between there, you actually worked for KOIL.
Right, I was partial owner of KOIL.
Was this after Don Burden lost the license?
This was after Don Burden lost the license.
And I think that's a whole nother show
Yeah.
we've talked about,
Yeah.
is the license revocation of the Star stations. And that was 1976, I believe.
I think you're right there.
So then you put the stations back on the air. You were a part owner and operated for how long?
I was there for probably a year and a half.
Okay. So
Until-
maybe 78, 79?
Till the IRS came after us.
All right, let's tell that story.
Okay, so they were taking the withholding from the employees, but not turning it over to the government.
That's not good.
No, so we ended up owing the government about $400,000. And the people that were involved were big money people, but they had enough money to walk away from it and leave their money on the table, which hurt me.
You weren't in that financial condition
I was
to
not
do
in that financial condition.
So,
If they gave it to you for nothing, could you make a living with it?
no,
Yeah.
not at all. So what happened to Coyle at that point?
Coyle got sold to Mitchell Broadcasting.
John Mitchell and Company took
Yeah.
over 1290 Coyle. However, right before the sale went through, what happened at the transmitter site?
The transmitter burned up.
So the sale couldn't go through until the repairs were made and the transmitter actually replaced.
Yes.
Were you involved in that replacement?
No.
Not at all.
I wanted to be as far away from there as possible.
You had already lost your money and
Yes.
didn't want to go back and look at it again.
And Webster bought the FM.
John Webster bought the
Yeah.
FM, which became KEFM
Right.
95.1, and today that's over at iHeart as KISS 95.
Right. And the call letters are KOIS.
KOIS.
Yes.
Okay.
As opposed to KIOS, which is us.
Little reverse call letters
Yeah.
there.
Uh-huh.
KIOS is the station of the Omaha Public School District. And what is the programming over there now?
NPR mostly. NPR and jazz.
NPR and jazz.
Yeah.
And you are in charge of the engineering, running a 40-year-old McMartin transmitter. Isn't
Right.
that ironic?
Yes. One that I helped build.
When you were in the
When I was
plant.
in the plant. I'm also in charge of television.
Okay.
Engineering for television and radio.
Now, KIOS doesn't actually have an on-air television station, right?
No, it's all cable. But then we took over the Knowledge Network also from UNO.
And public access cable.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So you worked there as well. Is there student involvement in either radio or television at the
There's
Omaha
no
Public
student
Schools?
there's no student involvement in radio. There's a huge student involvement in television. We've got all digital studios, state of the art, up to date, and everything.
And what is it usually used for in terms of programming?
Well, the kids generate their own programming mostly.
Public affairs programming, student issues, things like that?
Right.
And it's been pretty successful. Omaha Public Schools TV has been pretty successful as a program educationally.
Yes, it has.
And what's your role there other than just making sure everything works?
That's my role.
That's your role.
Yeah.
And you've been there how long now?
About 28 years.
In the public schools.
Right.
Did you ever think when you started out decades ago you would end up working for a public school system?
No, I didn't.
You figured you'd be retired on a beach by now somewhere.
Yeah.
Didn't quite work out.
Yeah.
But you're doing well.
I try.
You've known a lot of people over the years, both in the engineering end of things and in ownership, management, things like that. Do you have any particular stories that you can tell, maybe some things that people haven't heard before?
Well, there's a story about Jorg Klebe.
Jorg Klebe.
Yes.
That's Klebe.
Yeah, Klebe.
All right.
Okay, he was from New York. He was a German citizen and couldn't own a radio station.
The FCC would not allow
Would not
foreign
allow-
ownership.
Yeah.
Right.
So he owned KBWH, transmitter in Blair, well outside of Blair. Modale actually is where the transmitter was. And I remember he called me up one day. The format for KBWH was Urban Contemporary.
Which was unique at the time.
Very unique at the time. And the people at the station were trading out everything, and so York had to keep putting money into the station to keep it viable. And he finally got tired of it. And when he got his citizenship, he called me up and said, he said, "Do you have a truck?" I said, "Yes, I've got a truck, York." He says, "You know anybody else that's got a truck?" I says, "Yeah, Chuck Rummel's got a truck." So
Another engineer.
yeah, another engineer. So I called Chuck up. He says, "Meet me in back of the studio in the alleyway, and I'll tell you what to do." So we drove over to KBWH and
Where was this located at the time?
60th and Hartman,
Okay.
where the religious radio station was. KVSS took over that space.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so Chuck and I are out there, and he says, "I want everything out of here." I said, "Okay." So Chuck and I get our wire cutters and hacksaws, and we're pulling stuff out.
He meant everything.
He meant everything.
Now, this is in the back of the station.
Right.
What was going on in the front of the station?
Well, Yard took off his Armani suit, threw it on his BMW, and said, "You guys are
Done.
Yeah, you guys are done." And he had him out there for about a half hour. In the meantime, Chuck and I are loading the radio station in trucks and hauling it to Blair. So when they went back in the studio, there was nothing there. No
Surprised.
consoles, no nothing, no turntables. It was all gone.
And then the station moved to Blair, and you built facilities in Blair to
Right,
broadcast. And how long was it there?
Oh, gee, I think it was there about 2 years maybe
Mm-hmm.
in that bank building.
Looking back over your career and where you've been and what you've done, what do you see in terms of bringing younger engineers into the business? I know you're not real optimistic that there are young people learning the skills that you've learned over the years to maintain these radio stations going forward.
Right. Well, first of all, salaries have to increase to match the talent that's providing the service. We're on call 24/7. We have to have standby people when we're on vacation.
You do a lot of the standby work for stations around town as well.
Right,
Engineers go on vacation. Dick Dennis is the first one they call.
right.
You have keys to everybody's transmitters.
Yeah. And when I get called by John over at Suite 98, that's 9 radio stations plus my own.
Mm-hmm. And multiple transmitters, one of which, at the backup, is a McMartin.
Yes.
Did you help build that one too?
No, I did not.
Okay. But it's still on the air and still working.
Yeah.
A testament to what you did back then at McMartin Industries. But these young kids today are coming up with computer skills and don't have to subject themselves to the type of work that you did early on.
Right, and the salaries are higher too. They're not on call. They work an 8-hour day. You know, I work until it's done.
Whenever that may be.
Yeah.
And a lot of your work has to be done on overnights and times when the radio stations are not really functioning well.
Right.
You also get the calls when thunderstorms roll through, static electricity hits a tower, things like that, blowout circuits, rectifiers, amplifiers.
We've been pretty lucky at KIOS, K-I-O-S, because we haven't had a lot of lightning damage. We have had holes blown in our antenna, which we replaced. The AMs are more susceptible to lightning than the FMs are.
Now, for people that don't know, when you drive by the Benson High School area and you see that huge self-supporting tower, that's KIOS.
That is KIOS.
But your studios are located elsewhere.
Yeah, they're located in the TAC building, Teacher Administration Building, in the Career Center, actually.
And again, how many people involved at the Career Center or actually at the TAC Center running the radio station?
Let's see, I think we've got 5 full-time people and 3 part-timers.
Is it fully staffed 24/7?
No.
Is it automated?
Yes, it is.
Computer automation?
Yeah.
And how do you feel about that?
That's great. Well, we play BBC overnight, which comes down from NPR, so we don't have to do anything there. The automation does all the switching, so the automation is great. It works well. Don't have a lot of problems with it.
And it's all computer driven.
Right.
So the computers,
Well, there's nothing wrong with computers.
it's the people that run them.
Well, yeah.
So what do you see as a future for for you, Dick Dennis, what are you going to do next? Are you just going to stay at KIOS and continue to do what you're doing every day?
I'm going to retire at some point and spend time with my great-grandchildren.
When's that coming up?
When they tick me off.
Okay, and where are your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren here in town?
Yes, they are.
So
In fact, we're taking martial arts together, all of us.
You are taking martial arts.
Yes, with my great-grandchildren.
Are you able to keep up with them?
Actually, mostly.
How old are they?
I got 2 6-year-olds, a 10-year-old, and a 13-year-old.
And you keep up with them.
Yep.
Congratulations, that's
Yep.
amazing. All right, Dick Dennis is our guest on our program today. I want to thank you, Dick. It's been an absolute joy experiencing some of the memories that you bring to this project that no one else really has access to. We appreciate that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me over.
It's a pleasure. We've been talking about the role of engineering in the history of radio and television here in Nebraska. Dick Dennis of KIOS, the Omaha Public Schools radio station. This has been a production of UNO Television for the Nebraska Broadcasters Association History Project.